Have you ever heard a sound you just couldn't explain? A whisper on the wind? A melody with no source? Tonight, we're going to talk about a story that will make you listen a little more closely to the silence of the night. It's about an old brick church, the kind you see in small towns, standing quiet and stoic, holding decades of memories within its walls. And it's about a man who discovered that some memories don't just fade away. D-E-H. Our story begins with a choir director, a man named Arthur. His life revolved around music. For years, he dedicated his weekends to that very church, standing right across the street from his home. He wasn't just a director, he was a mentor, a friend, and the heart of a small but passionate community of singers. Every Saturday, rain or shine, the church would fill with their voices. They would spend hours rehearsing hymns, both old and new. Arthur was a perfectionist. He'd have them go over a single bar of music again and again until the harmonies were just right, until the blend of voices created something truly heavenly. The sound they made was his life's work, a beautiful tapestry of melody and devotion that filled the old sanctuary. He knew every singer by name, every voice by its unique timbre. There was Eleanor, the elderly soprano whose voice, though fragile, held a lifetime of faith. There was young Thomas, the tenor whose eagerness sometimes made him rush the tempo. And there was Sarah the alto, whose quiet, steady voice was the anchor of the entire choir. Together, they weren't just a group of people singing. They were a family, united by their love for the music and the history of the church itself. The seasons would turn, and we'd tem. The music would change: joyful carols at Christmas, somber hymns during Lent, and triumphant anthems for Easter. When summer arrived, the choir would take a break. The members would go on vacation, and the church would fall silent, resting until the cooler days of autumn called them back together. It was during one of these summer breaks that our story takes a strange turn. The choir had disbanded for the season weeks ago. The heavy oak doors of the church were locked tight, and a peaceful quiet had settled over the neighborhood. One hot, still night, Arthur was in bed, trying to sleep. The air was thick, and the only sound was the distant hum of cicadas. He tossed and turned, but sleep wouldn't come. And then he heard it. At first, it was so faint he thought he was dreaming. A soft, ethereal sound drifting through his open bedroom window. It was music. Not just any music, it was a choir. He sat up in bed, straining his ears. It was unmistakable. The layered harmonies, the gentle rise and fall of the melody. It was a hymn. But how? The church was empty. His choir was scattered across the state, enjoying their summer. He got out of bed and walked to the window, peering across the dark street at the silhouette of the old brick church. The building was dark, not a single light on, yet the singing continued, a ghostly and beautiful sound that seemed to hang in the midnight air. It was a hymn they hadn't sung in years, an old, almost forgotten piece from a tattered hymnal that had long since been retired. The voices were delicate, like a memory you can't quite grasp. Arthur's heart began to race. His first thought was practical. It had to be pranksters. Some kids must have found a way inside and were playing a recording to spook the neighborhood. Annoyed but also a little intrigued, he threw on some clothes and hurried outside. The night was even quieter on the street. As he got closer to the church, the music became a little clearer, yet it still felt distant, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. He reached the massive front doors and pushed. Locked. Just as he expected. He walked around the entire building, checking every window, every side entrance. Everything was sealed shut. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no light peeking through the stained glass windows. The church was a silent, sealed tomb, but the music was still there. Now that he was standing right beside the stone walls, he realized the sound was different. It wasn't coming from inside the main hall. It seemed to be coming from below him. He knelt down, pressing his ear against the cold foundation stones near the ground. The voices were clearer here, seeping up through the earth. It sounded like an unseen choir was rehearsing deep beneath the floorboards, their voices muffled by layers of wood and stone. The harmonies were perfect, the notes pure. It was hauntingly beautiful. He recognized some of the melodies as hymns that had fallen out of favor decades ago. Songs that even the oldest members of his choir wouldn't remember. It was as if a choir from a bygone era had returned to their beloved church to practice for an eternal performance. Shaken, Arthur backed away from the church. He stood across the street, Hoostwatch and listening to the phantom hymns, until the first light of dawn began to break. The singing slowly faded with the darkness, disappearing as the sun rose, leaving only the sound of the waking world. He told no one, at first. Who would believe him? They'd think the old choir director was losing his mind. But night after night, it happened again. Just after midnight, the celestial music would begin, a secret concert for the stars. Sometimes he would just listen from his window, and other times he'd walk over, pressing his ear to the ground, feeling the faint vibrations of voices from another time. He never found a rational explanation. He spoke to the church custodian, who swore no one had been inside. He even discreetly asked some of the oldest residents in the area if they remembered anything unusual about the church's past. They shared stories of a famous choir from the early 20th century, known for their incredible, angelic sound, but nothing that explained the ghostly music he was hearing now. Over time, Arthur came to accept the midnight choir. It wasn't frightening anymore. It was comforting, a beautiful mystery that connected him to the deep history of the place he loved so much. He felt like he was the guardian of a sacred secret. Years have passed since Arthur first heard the singing. He's older now, and a new director leads the living choir in the old brick church. But the legend lives on. The story has been whispered around town, becoming a piece of local folklore. They say that if you happen to be walking past that church late at night, when the world is still and silent, you should pause for a moment. Stand by the old stone walls and just listen. You might hear it too. Not loud, never startling, but just clear enough to recognize the melody. The distant, beautiful sound of a choir that never left, forever practicing their hymns in the quiet dark, long after midnight. What do you think's happening at the old brick church? Is it a trick of the wind? A shared local delusion? Or are they spirits of singers past, truly still gathered there, unable to leave the music they loved behind? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you have a local ghost story or an unexplained mystery from your own hometown, I would love to hear it. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the strange and mysterious. Stay curious, and until next time, listen closely to the night. You never know what you might hear. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you knew you were completely alone? Imagine a quiet, small countryside church, the kind of place that feels ancient and steeped in peace. For years, it was looked after by a dedicated caretaker. His routine was simple. Every evening, he'd walk the aisles, check every corner, turn off all the lights, and lock the heavy wooden doors behind him. It was a ritual he performed with a quiet sense of duty, ensuring the sacred space was safe and secure for the night. After he passed away, a new caretaker took over, a younger man who respected the traditions of the old church. He followed the same routine, locking up each night, just as his predecessor had. One crisp autumn evening, after completing his nightly checks, the new caretaker locked the doors and started his walk home. He'd only gone a few yards down the path when a strange feeling made him turn back. He stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The church, which should have been shrouded in darkness, was ablaze with light. Every single stained glass window was glowing, casting colorful, ethereal patterns onto the graveyard outside. It was as if someone had just flipped every switch inside. He was certain he had turned everything off. It was the most important part of his job. Annoyed with himself, thinking he must have been distracted and simply forgotten, he trudged back to the entrance. He fumbled with the old iron key, the sound of the lock turning echoing loudly in the silent night. Pushing the heavy door open, he stepped into the nave. The church was plunged back into complete darkness. Not a single light was on. The air was still and cold, and the only sound was his own breathing. He stood there for a moment, completely bewildered. He could have sworn he saw the entire building illuminated just seconds before. Shaking his head, he walked through the aisles again, his footsteps the only sound in the vast emptiness. He double-checked every light switch. They were all in the off position. There was no logical explanation. Maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him. Feeling a little unnerved, he stepped back outside, pulling the heavy door shut and locking it once more. He took a few hesitant steps away, then turned around, his eyes fixed on the windows. And then it happened again. In an instant, the church windows lit up, one after another, as if an unseen person was walking down the central aisle, flipping the switches as they went. The light was soft at first, then grew to a brilliant glow that filled the entire building. He could almost imagine the faint echo of footsteps on the stone floor, but he knew, with chilling certainty, that the church was empty. He was the only one with a key. There was no one inside. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. This was no trick of the light, no faulty wiring. This was something else entirely. He watched, frozen in place, as the lights bathed the church in their mysterious glow for a few minutes, before extinguishing just as suddenly as they had appeared, plunging the building back into darkness. He didn't go back in that night. He simply turned and walked home, his mind racing to find a rational explanation where there was none. The next day, he cautiously brought up the incident with some of the older locals who had attended the church their entire lives. He expected them to be surprised, maybe even skeptical, but to his astonishment, they just nodded knowingly. One elderly woman smiled faintly and told him, "Oh, that's just old Mr. Abernathy. He was the caretaker here for over 50 years. He loved this church more than anything." She explained that they had all seen the lights for decades. Ever since the old caretaker had passed away, his spirit seemed to remain, forever bound to the place he had cherished. They said he was just doing his nightly rounds, making sure everything was in its right place, just as he had done every single night when he was alive. His dedication to the church was so strong that not even death could stop him from his duties. The locals weren't scared of the lights. In fact, they found it comforting. It was a sign that the old caretaker was still watching over their beloved church, a silent, ghostly guardian making his nightly patrol. From that day on, the new caretaker never felt afraid when he saw the lights. When he would lock up and walk away, he'd often turn back, and if the windows began to glow, he would just smile and whisper into the night, "Good night." Mr. Abernathy, the church is all yours. The story serves as a gentle reminder that some bonds are so strong, they can even transcend the boundaries between life and death. What do you think? Was it a devoted spirit? Or is there another explanation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Have you ever stumbled upon something so unsettling, so out of place, that it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? Imagine being a pastor, someone who dedicates their life to faith and reason, and finding something in your own church that defies all logical explanation. This is the story of Pastor Thomas, a man who thought he'd seen everything, until one late night spent taking inventory changed his perception of reality forever. It was well past midnight. The old church was silent, save for the gentle creak of the floorboards beneath Pastor Thomas's feet as he moved through the pews, clipboard in hand. He was a practical man, not given to flights of fancy or superstition. The inventory was a mundane task, something he did every year, but this night would be different. As he approached the pulpit, the focal point of his sanctuary, his flashlight beam landed on something that made him stop dead in his tracks. There, on the ornate wooden lectern, where his own well-worn Bible usually rested, sat a different one. It was enormous, ancient-looking, with a dark, cracked leather cover, but the most jarring feature was the heavy, rusted iron lock that held its pages firmly shut. A thick, tarnished chain was wrapped around it, securing it to the pulpit itself. Pastor Thomas frowned. He didn't remember this Bible. He certainly hadn't put it there, and he was sure he would have noticed such a conspicuous and, frankly, bizarre object. He ran his hand over the cold metal of the lock. Who would do this, and why? Was it some kind of prank? A strange donation left without a note. His mind raced through the possibilities, each one more unlikely than the last. He tried to jiggle the lock, but it was solid, unyielding. A sense of unease, cold and sharp, began to creep into the edges of his practical mind. The silence of the church suddenly felt heavier. He felt a distinct, irrational feeling that he was not alone. Shaking his head to clear the thought, he decided the mystery would have to wait until morning. He finished his inventory with a hurried pace. The image of the locked book burned into his mind. The next day, after the morning service, Pastor Thomas approached a few of the church's oldest members, a group he affectionately called the pillars of the congregation. He brought them to the pulpit and pointed to the mysterious Bible. "Does anyone know anything about this?" he asked, expecting a simple explanation. Instead, a wave of palpable anxiety washed over the small group. Their faces grew pale, and they exchanged nervous, knowing glances. Mrs. Gable, a woman who had been attending the church since she was a child, wrung her hands. "Pastor," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "But Bible, it's always been here, but it must always stay locked." Another elder, Mr. Peterson, a stoic man not known for dramatics, cleared his throat. "It's not a joke, Pastor. We don't talk about it much. We were hoping you'd never have to know." He explained that the lock wasn't there to keep people from reading the book. It was to keep the book from opening itself. Pastor Thomas raised an eyebrow, his skepticism returning. "Opening itself, Mr. Peterson. Books don't just open on their own," the elders insisted. They told him a story that had been passed down through generations of the congregation. They claimed that on several occasions, decades ago, the lock had been removed or had broken, and each time, without fail, the Bible was later found open, not just to any page, but always to the exact same passage. "Which passage?" Pastor Thomas asked, his curiosity now warring with his disbelief. Mrs. Gaber shivered, though the sanctuary was warm. "It was a verse in Deuteronomy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It warns against heeding messages from the beyond, against listening to voices that aren't of this world." She recounted how, after each time the book opened, strange things would happen in the church. Faint whispers would be heard when no one was there. Shadows would move in the periphery, and an overwhelming feeling of dread would settle over the building for days. The only way to stop it was to close the book and lock it shut again. Pastor Thomas listened patiently, but inside, he was convinced it was nothing more than old folklore, a spooky story born from drafts in the creaks of an old building. Voices from Beyond, a self-appanning book. It was preposterous. He was a man of God, yes, but also a man of logic. He believed in miracles, but this sounded like something else entirely. This sounded like fear. With all due respect, I sighed gently, "I can't allow superstition to have a place at this pulpit. It's probably just a faulty binding, or drafts from the old windows. We need to face these fears, not lock them away." Ignoring their quiet, desperate protests, he went to his office and returned with a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. With a loud snap, the old, rusted lock fell to the floor, breaking the chain with it. The elders gasped, stepping back as if the book itself might lash out. Pastor Thomas removed the broken chain and placed the large Bible back on the lectern. He ran his hand over the cover. It was just a book. An old, heavy book. "See," he said, offering them a reassuring smile. "It's just a book. Let's leave it unlocked. Let the light in. There's nothing to be afraid of." The elders didn't look convinced. They left the church that afternoon with worried expressions, leaving Pastor Thomas alone in the unsettlingly quiet sanctuary. As he locked up for the night, he gave the open Bible one last look. It remained closed, inert, just as he had left it. He felt a small sense of victory over the old superstitions. That night, however, his sleep was restless. He dreamt of whispers in an empty church, of pages turning in the dark, moved by an unseen hand. He woke up before his alarm, a feeling of profound unease washing over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. He drove to the church as the first rays of dawn were breaking the horizon. He told himself he was just being silly, that he was just going to prove to himself that the elders' fears were unfounded. He unlocked the heavy front doors and stepped into the cool, still air of the sanctuary. Everything looked normal. He walked down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His heart began to pound in his chest as he neared the pulpit, and then he saw it. The Bible was no longer closed. It lay wide open on the lectern. There was no breeze in the sealed church. No windows were open. Nothing was out of place that could explain it. It was simply open. He approached slowly, almost afraid of what he would find. His eyes fell upon the page. The text was in an old script, the ink faded with age, and there, under the faint morning light, he read the highlighted verse. It was exactly as the elders had warned, a passage from Deuteronomy, a stark and chilling warning against listening to spirits and seeking messages from the dead. A cold dread, far more intense than anything he'd felt the night before, seized him. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't a faulty binding. This was something else. Something he couldn't explain with logic or reason. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the church pressing in on him, the ancient words on the page seeming to stare back at him. He finally reached out with a trembling hand and closed the book. The sound of the heavy covers meeting echoed like a gunshot in the empty hall. He immediately went to his workshop, found the strongest new padlock he owned, and returned to the pulpit. With a heavy heart and a newfound respect for the fears of his elders, he wrapped a new chain around the Bible and clicked the lock shut. From that day forward, Pastor Thomas never spoke of the incident again, and the Bible on the pulpit remained locked, its secrets and its warnings sealed tightly within. The congregation never asked, and he never offered an explanation. Some things, he had learned, are not meant to be understood, only to be respected. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy stories that blur the line between the known and the unknown, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something that you just couldn't explain? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious.